On the weekend beginning the 8th of December, Justice League, now in its 4th weekend of release, passed a milestone. After being out for 3 full weeks, it finally exceeded what the Avengers grossed in its opening weekend alone. During those weeks, the conversation has not been a good one from Warner's point of view. Financially, the movie is labeled a disaster. The future of DC on film has been called into question. The heads of Warner are accused of sacrificing the movie for their own personal gain. Another shakeup is going on behind the scenes, in which Jeff Johns has been demoted. And there is an increasing demand to see Snyder's pre-Joss Whedon reshoots cut of the movie. That is what we will be discussing in this roundtable. And joining me for that is Midnight's Edge After Dark's Tom Connors.
Hello.
As well as Midnight's Edge Narrator Supreme Rob Gallo.
Hello, everybody.
So guys, before we begin, what did you think about the movie? Tom?
My review, which I'm sure you can post down below, pretty much says the basics of how I felt. Too much, too far, too soon. None of the character changes were earned. None of the tone changes were earned. I mean, people are going to say, oh, you guys complain one way or the other. No, they had taken one step in the right direction, then they took 2 extra steps, though. And unfortunately, this film is just so chopped down, and the focus is all wrong. Superman should have been the villain. The whole film should have been about us getting the Superman that we've all been waiting for, which, don't get me wrong, he was one of the best parts of this film. I couldn't stand the Flash. There was a YouTube comment that was dead on when it said that they don't know if they were trying to make the Flash 16 or 26 half the time, and it was just, yeah, outside of that, it's such a clusterfuck and a Frankenstein edit that it hardly earned the 6 out of 10 I gave it, which mainly it just got because my 10-year-old self would have loved this movie. It's the best Super Friends movie you're gonna see, probably, but it's not up to snuff considering how much money was put into it, how long we've been waiting for it, and the hype around it. Now, of course, we're going to break this all down, so I don't want to get into it too much, but that's kind of my overall impression, was I had a hard time enjoying it. I wanted to. I really did. I wanted this to be the one I liked, but it unfortunately there's too many issues.
Well, all in all, I thought it was a hot mess. A Frankensteinian abomination of several directors and studio notes, and too many cooks in the kitchen. To say what I did like, I liked the introduction with the Leonard Cohen cover by Sigrid, who, by the way, is from the same country as me. Leonard Cohen is huge in Norway. So yeah, I still would have preferred the original Leonard Cohen version, though.
I was going to say I'd rather have had the original version.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been so much better. But anyway, loved the introduction, so that was great. And I really enjoyed the Flash and Superman eye contact. That was an amazing scene. And I liked that by the end, we had the real Superman. And that's it for what I liked.
That's pretty much what I like too.
Yeah, because everything else was just a complete and total disaster. Like the story, been there, done that, seen it before, seen it better. Visually, it was ugly. The characters were uninteresting. And Batman was the worst of all. Such a complete and total character assassination. Like, they got Batman pretty good in the previous movies, other than him being like too violent and all of that. But here, now they make him like the comedy sidekick. The hell is up with that? And Flash, what was even the point of him? What do you need him for? You already have 2 speedsters. You have a speedster in Wonder Woman who can stop bullets with her bracelets, and you have a speedster in Superman. So what's the point with the Flash? Why was he there?
Spider-Man 2.0.
Exactly, just like Boomerang in Suicide Squad. Watch the movie. He doesn't do shit. He serves absolutely no purpose in the movie. He's just there, along for the ride. At no point does he do anything to change anything of any significance. Like, yeah, fine, in this movie, the Flash supercharges the Mother Box to revive Superman, which was stupid, but other than that, yeah, pointless. So, no, it was just really frustrating, and not only was it frustrating to look at, it was frustrating to listen to, because the score, it's one of the most boring and most drab, pointless scores I've ever heard in my life. And if we contrast this to Batman v Superman, now Batman v Superman is the movie that got us into this mess. Like, everyone I know in person have told me that that was a mess and they hated it. Like when I was in Spain recently, even the taxi driver told me randomly when we saw like Justice League poster that he wasn't going to see Liga del Justicia, or what it's called there, because Batman v Superman was mierda. And that's from the taxi driver, so I think that's a pretty general sentiment. But anyway, I can appreciate the ultimate cut of that movie, because it was one consistent vision. They went for it, and they went all the way. Now fine, it wasn't the movie anyone wanted. It did wrong in bringing in so many things, so many storylines, that they just ruined the future of the DC universe right there in that one movie. But they went all the way and they did it consistently. But here, this is just a hodgepodge, and I couldn't stand it. It was just painful and embarrassing to watch. And ugly and stupid and CGI shitfest. And we saw the movie, which is something loads of people didn't do when we look at the box office. Of course, we are in the position here where we have someone who didn't see the movie. So Rob, what was it about Justice League that was so unappealing to you that you still haven't seen it?
Well, pretty much, I had no real enthusiasm to see it, really. There's been a couple of health issues in the family, so my time has been sort of fractured in that respect. But even when that had gotten resolved, just the track record and having seen Man of Steel and seen Batman v Superman, did I really want more of the same? Really? Did I really want to go through that again? Did I really want to go into the theater saying, okay, it's going to be different this time? Really? It's got to get better than this. My enthusiasm for the DC universe has taken a shot right through the heart. It really has. I'm done. I gotta say that. I'm done with this version of the DC extended universe, or cinematic universe, or what they're calling it.
I have one question to that, Rob. You say that you are done with this version of the DCEU. Is there anything that can bring you back? Like, for instance, Shazam or Flashpoint or something? Or is it only a hard reboot, scrapping everything or starting over, that will bring you back again?
Give me a good Green Lantern movie. That's what will bring me back. How hard is it to get Space Police right? I mean, that's just something that is just screaming to be made. The memory of Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern movie has been lingering in the background. But if you do Green Lantern right, then it's going to forgive a lot of sins. It really is.
How about Shazam? Is that going to bring you back?
Maybe, but I have too many memories of the Winnebago in the desert, you know, and the old guy and the old CBS live action show. So yeah, that's gonna be a tough sell for me. Andre might not know what we're talking about. But, like, you know, there was in the 70s there was a live action Shazam series on Saturday mornings.
Yeah, I've seen some stills and clips here and there. It looks pretty stupid if you ask me. But
Shazam's gonna fall flat on its face.
Doesn't interest me in the slightest, but that's not
the only chance they had with that is if they would have went at it with a comedy kind of angle, but at that point it takes it far removed from anything in the DCEU, so it would have to be something on its own.
Not to spend too much time on this, but there was a time where Captain Marvel, aka Shazam, was outselling Superman as a comic. I mean, and granted, we got to go back to the late 50s, early 60s, but I mean, right. The character does have a significant and rich history.
But just nowadays, nobody knows.
Yeah, now it's relative.
The character,
yeah, like I said, it's been relegated to it being a joke. You know, guy with the red pajamas and the lightning bolt.
He's like the new Aquaman now. As far as like the general audience goes, I mean, obviously we don't want to spend too much time on this. Most people don't even know the character that well outside of the whole thing that The Rock's been talking about playing Black Adam. Shit, there's probably more people who know who Black Adam is now than know anything of Captain Marvel and the whole Shazam story itself.
Yeah, Dwayne Johnson has been talking up Black Adam for the past 3 years?
And that's what I'm saying. Because of him, people probably know who Black Adam is, but as far as the connection to the whole Shazam, you know, overall story, I doubt as many people even know.
Moving on then, we are not too excited about the next movies that they have planned, but we're getting back to that. So let's just take the things back to Justice League and the box office. The movie has, at the time of this recording, grossed $212 million at the domestic box office, and it has now crossed $600 million worldwide. What stands out to you about these numbers? Tom?
If you would have told me a year ago even that the Justice League movie was going to pretty much peter out at about $600 million, I would have laughed and said you're full of shit. And the fact that it is clearly before our eyes that this movie failed on so many levels financially, I'm surprisingly taken aback considering all the shit that we've reported here at Midnight's Edge, considering all the stuff that we've covered on the podcast and stuff over the last however long. I'm still beside myself with the fact that this film has not managed to even remotely come close to anybody's expectations, predictions, or even Warner Brothers. You know, I'm sure they're just, well, we know, and we'll get into that.
Oh, they're besides
exactly,
themselves.
Yeah. So I'm right along with them to a point, even though, like I said, I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't be. Even a couple months ago, even a few weeks ago, if you'd have told me that Justice League was going to be lucky to even break $600 million at the box office worldwide, I would have called you a liar.
Rob?
I thought for sure this thing was going to make more money than it did. I really did.
Right.
This is embarrassing. That's the only way I can put this. This is just downright embarrassing.
The horror for Justice League is that it's not going to be able to match the $668 million that Man of Steel earned back in 2013, and that is discounting inflation, meaning that Justice League will have been the most expensive modern DC movie by far, and it will also be the least grossing, coming in under Man of Steel. Now, this is really embarrassing because they weren't satisfied with Man of Steel. It was the response to Man of Steel that movie did not earn $1 billion that caused them to do the course correct, where they went with Batman v Superman instead of Man of Steel 2. So like the higher-ups at Warner, they were the ones that decided that, no, Superman didn't do the business on his own, so we're going to have Batman come in and save the day. That was the first correction, to get to that $1 billion. Didn't work. And now they've course corrected again. And they've paid a crap ton. And it comes in less than Man of Steel, the movie that they weren't satisfied with the performance of to begin with.
And you also have one other embarrassing thing. You had a movie that just come out not even 6 months ago in Wonder Woman, who is in this movie.
Speaking of Wonder Woman, something else embarrassing that has happened for DC is that now, this weekend, the same weekend that Justice League was able to cross the 200 million mark and basically match what the Avengers did in its opening weekend, during that same time frame, Thor Ragnarok has passed Wonder Woman at the worldwide box office. So now all 3 Marvel movies released this year, Spider-Man Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and Thor Ragnarok, have worldwide outgrossed the 2 DC movies, Wonder Woman and Justice League, and that's not going to change.
That's pretty embarrassing.
And what's even worse, if you look at the numbers, because then Justice League is going to peter out at about 650-ish, over, under, thereabouts.
If it's lucky.
By the end. Yeah, if it's lucky. 100 million of that comes from China. Take out that 100 million, and you are left with a movie that in the rest of the world, outside of China, did 550 million. That is stunning in how awful it is, and just how badly they have damaged the brand everywhere. That is not China and Brazil, because it did pretty well there as well. But outside of those, this movie is doing so much worse than Batman v Superman, pretty much across the board. And that does not bode well for the future of DC on film.
It needs to be pointed out that most of the money from overseas, Warner Brothers doesn't even see.
Yeah, they only get only a few cents on the dollar, right?
I think anywhere between 15 to 20% at the most from China, and it's not much more than that in other countries. I mean, I don't know the exact breakdown, but
depends from country to country, because in some countries they get close to the same as they do in the States. The difference is how much they have to pay in local tax, and that's going to be more than in the States somewhere.
No, I was going to say also in the US and stuff, the way it is, I'm sure it's the same in outside of. Every week the movie is open, the less and less and less the studio gets.
That depends from country to country.
Right.
That is not a certain thing. But what is certain is that they do not get as much as they do in the US in any market. And they get the least in China. that's where they get the absolute least from. So then it really sucks that that is kind of like their most successful market, because yeah, so they get 100 million in China. Yeah, that's great for bragging points and bragging rights. But in actual dollars, it would have been better for them to make 50 million more across Europe than 100 million in China.
Yeah, because they're lucky to get like 10, 15, 20 million of that.
Yeah.
It suffices to say that pending, of course, The Last Jedi's release, Warner Brothers has kind of lost the superhero battle, but they won the war overall. It's neck and neck right now, but that's just to say, obviously, Warner Brothers themselves is not in dire straits, but this DC universe is clearly barely on life support.
Yeah, no, Warner themselves are doing really good, because they are the first major studio to cross the 2 billion mark this year at the domestic box office, propelled by Wonder Woman and It. So Warner Brothers, on the whole, are doing just fine. And that is actually something that DC fans should be a little bit worried about. Because since they are doing so well overall, if they decided that this DC stuff really isn't working for us, so just cut it out, they can do that. And they're not going to break a sweat over it. You're not going to get any more DC films. They don't care, because they have enough other assets to fall back on. That is something that we should keep in mind, that DC is a nice bonus for Warner, but no more than that. It is not something they are dependent upon.
And that's something that I've always pointed out to people throughout the podcast and just talking to them on the Facebook groups and everything else in the comments, is even though it would work best for Warner Brothers to turn around and create a DC Studios that specifically focuses on the DC products, they're not going to do that. It's not within their interest to. There's no money in it for them, in a sense that it would consist of doing too much. When, like you just said, they're doing so well in other places, they'd almost be better off licensing out the characters. And I would see them start doing that, as opposed to actually just continuing to spend the kind of money they've spent on just Batman v Superman and this film alone. Because let's face it, even though they're only reporting, the budget was like 300 some million or whatever, we know it's got to be more than that. And then you add in advertising and everything else, and this movie was just a financial disaster.
That's a great point, though. And that also brings us to the next topic of discussion. The rap recently broke that the movie, which many said should have been pushed back because it was really rushed to make its November 17th release date, and CGI effects, everything suffered for it because they had to rush it so badly. And the reason for that, apparently, was because he wanted his bonus. Because if the movie had been delayed until 2018, then he might not be with the company anymore, because they're in the process of merging with AT&T, and that's going to result in a change of management, most likely, regardless of anything else. So if he's gone, he's not getting his bonus, and he really, really wanted that bonus. So he demanded that the movie has to be out on November 17th. What do you think about that decision, assuming this is true?
It's capitalism at its finest. I mean, sacrificing the long-term benefit of the company for his own personal gain. I mean, you wanted to make sure you get your bonus, fine, but there's a lot more people dependent on you.
This whole thing makes more sense now of everything that we've been hearing leaked out of Warner Brothers for the past 2 years. Since the merger was announced, they've been running around like chickens with their heads cut off with no leadership. They've been bleeding money like a stuck pig. You had the situation with Mustache Gate. I mean, that is just a prime example of how this entire thing was done under a microscope. Everybody knew every move they were making. So I have a hard time believing that the company is going to overlook a lot of this, especially with this leak getting out by the Wrap saying that Sujihara rushed this entire project just to get his bonus, which to me is just basically a way of him trying to beef up his severance package, because like you said, once and if this merger goes through, he already knew he was out the door.
It comes down to this. If I'm going to go, I'm going to grab as much as I can grab going out the door. Really, that's what it sounds like. Anything that isn't nailed down, they're going to take with them, really.
Yeah, what I think is really frustrating here is that, as a general thing, it's fine for an executive to be greedy. In the words of Gordon Gekko, that he never actually said, but basically meaning is greed is good. And for corporations like this, that kind of works fine, provided that the situation is aligned so that the executive benefits when the company benefits. And in Tsujihara's defense, he has done really, really good for Warner on the whole. On the whole, they are doing really good. Just look at this year where they are the first studio to cross 2 billion domestically. That's his leadership, or rather, a little bit of luck and a little bit of leadership and appointing the right people and supporting the right projects. So that's all good and well. But under his watch, the DC brand, a brand which is worth billions. It is worth so much more than what they have grossed this year. And under his watch, that has been compromised really badly. And their core asset, their Avengers, have been utterly destroyed. Like, the brand value right now is in the gutter. And that happened on his watch. He mandated directions and routes be taken that did nothing but harm the movie and harm the brand. And fine, even in the situation where Justice League was doomed anyway. Let's just say that because of Batman v Superman, there was no version of this movie that was going to open to more than 90-something million. Doesn't matter if it was a Zack Snyder movie, doesn't matter if it was a Joss Whedon movie, just that it was the follow-up to Batman v Superman and everything that came before. That alone would prevent the movie from opening to 100 million. Given that was the case, then the choices that he made of forcing the reshoots, forcing the movie to be released in November, he threw so much more good money after bad. Because of his choices, the cost of the movie went up to 300 million. That they will admit to, so it might even be more. And the movie might not have cost nearly as much, probably would have cost like 200 or something. But 300? No, that wasn't necessary. That was not necessary. They could, in a hypothetical situation, have said, fine, we're going to lose here anyway. Just take the Snyder Cut, release it, cut our costs, just do the minimum needed to get it done, and get it out, and get it done with. And then we move on. If he had done that, they might have broken even. But because of the costs associated with restructuring the movie while it was being made and retooling it after the fact and rushing it to the November 17th release, which then meant they had to loan Henry Cavill and they got the whole mustache thing going. If they had just waited like another month, they wouldn't have had that, but they couldn't because of the November release date. That has cost them. That is what took the movie from break even to losing 100 million thereabouts. That's all on Tsujihara. And that is something that's a strike against him, regardless of what else positive he has done for the studio. Now, Warner, they're in deep shit with this whole AT&T merger, because Congress have some issues with that, their president has some issues with that, so that's a whole other ball game waiting to be played out. But the most monumental cost here is that of the brand. Just consider where they should have been with all their assets. Imagine, fine, Man of Steel didn't do too well, but if then they had made a less divisive Man of Steel 2, and then Wonder Woman, screw Suicide Squad, they could have gotten Aquaman out instead, or The Flash, and then made a Justice League movie. Imagine what conversation we could have been having now if they had just made better movies, if they had not made Batman v Superman.
So they would have been better off just cutting their losses and releasing the Zack Snyder version or whatever to begin with.
But you need someone to make that call, and that's a leadership call, and that's kind of been the problem at Warner, that they haven't had a proper leadership, and they've restructured that several times over, as we've covered over the last year. But now we've gotten word that there is more restructuring going on.
Yeah, as we just recently reported, of course, over on After Dark, and has been just circulating with all kinds of new revelations over the past few days. So surely by the time you guys are hearing this, we've had even more developments in this. But shake up is the word that they are using over there at DC to change things. John Berg was switched from his role in the DC Films production area over to work with other people, so he's out of the picture there. We've had reports earlier in the year, of course, about the whole Diane Nelson and Jeff Johns situation, and now we're getting reports that Jeff Johns has also been demoted as well. So it sounds like everybody who was even close to being in charge of this stuff is kind of being cleared out. For whom we don't know, for what we don't know. So Andre, what's your take on all this?
Well, the most important change is basically that even if DC didn't have their own dedicated studio, They kind of had their own unit, and they had their own building on the Warner lot, where they were allowed to sit undisturbed and just do their thing. That obviously wasn't working for them, so those have your own building privileges have been revoked, and the DC operation is being absorbed into the ordinary Warner operation, so that Warner, the main studio, will take a more active role in developing future movies. And I think that in the short run, this is probably a good move. It's not a good move in the long run, but in the short run, what is the evidence? Well, the evidence is that Warner, they know how to make movies. Good movies, acclaimed movies that are successful. DC, on the other hand, they don't really have that good a catalog to try to argue why they should be allowed their own studio, their own building, because it really hasn't worked for them. So probably I think that all the movies are going to be overseen by the same producers that do all the other movies for Warner, and that's probably good. Make sure that the movies work standalone. And then hopefully some producer there is going to show that he or she has got this, that they know how to make this click. And then, in the future, if they get this working, then they can make a DC Studios again. But right now, they just have to fix the brand. They have to get it working. And then they can't just send those people off over there in isolation and hope they sort it out. Not while they have the proper studio that have sorted out at least how to make movies. And that's the big problem with the DC movies so far. They're not really good adaptations of the comic, and they certainly don't work as standalone movies.
One guy actually, Jeff Johns, what is his role in all of this? I mean, because it doesn't seem like he really does anything. It seems like they just brought him in just so he could just wave to everybody at Comic-Con and say, hey, I'm Jeff Johns, how's it going?
Well, and we have that famous saying on the After Dark podcast that we swore we should have copyrighted and put on a t-shirt, and that is, where the fuck is Jeff Johns? Because we've said that every single time some shitty news leaks out about something going on behind the scenes at DC. It's like, where is he? We thought he was supposed to be the front man, the guy who's overseeing all this. They toted him like he was their quote-unquote Kevin Feige, but yet he has not been out there getting in front of the shitty news and the leaks and all the, the bad press.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the issue, actually. That whole thing with the adults are talking and who's the adult and who's the child. Basically, my understanding was that when they appointed both Jeff Johns and John Berg, they did it with the understanding that the two of them would function like a Kevin Feige. Problem is that Jeff Johns, he knows the comic, and Berg, he knows the movies, but he doesn't know the comics. So you have like then a comic guy, and you have a movie guy. And the thought was that the two of them together are supposed to be able to do the same job of Kevin Feige, who is first and foremost a producer and a filmmaker. And second, he's a filmmaker who loves his comics and understands his comics and knows what to adapt and what not to adapt. And maybe if left to their own devices, Berg and Johns would have been able to work out something similar between them. But I'm not sure they ever got the opportunity to do that, not undisturbed. You go back and you look at Marvel. When the studio was being built, when they were building their brand, you had Kevin Feige who answered to Perlmutter, and Perlmutter then again answered up to Disney Corporate. And Feige wasn't too happy with that. That resulted in conflicts and everything, and he was just answering to Perlmutter. And he was able to get Perlmutter out of the equation so that he would report directly to Disney Corporate. So he had like the direct link. He has an issue with something, he needs an approval, he can take it directly to the top right away. I don't think that Berg and Johns were ever in that position. Right. I think there were several layers between them and Tsujihara.
Not the least of which was Diane Nelson.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think that all of those layers in between, they wanted their voice heard. They wanted to do something to show that they were worth their paycheck, that they weren't just sitting there passively wasting studio money. So they wanted to give notes just to give notes, and they gave bad notes. And that way you got so many cooks in the kitchen, because with everyone, both from the bottom to the top and sideways, wanted their input. And then you end up in a situation where they're not making just one movie, they're making several movies with several different visions, and no one is really in charge. And that's what you kind of get from Justice League. It's a Frankensteinian mess of several filmmakers, and most notably several cooks in the kitchen. It's what you get when you are making several different movies at once. And by that I mean every person who has some kind of influence has a different vision and a different idea for the movie, and they don't click, and then you get just this abomination. So where is Jeff Johns? Probably he's wishing that things didn't go down this way, but he's powerless to prevent it, because I think that he got like this figurehead position, but with very little real power and real influence. Oh, real enough that he can take the fall, which he has. And right now he's being demoted again back to like comic book guy, that we are going to ask if we are in doubt, and then we're going to choose to listen to you or choose not to listen to you. And that might be a good idea, because he's not a producer, he's a comic book guy first and foremost, and maybe he's gonna make the wrong choices with what is important, what is going to work on screen, what isn't, what do we need to focus on, and what can be de-emphasized. You need someone who's both a producer and a comic book guy to figure that out.
Well, and there's even people who would even argue that he's not even a good comic book guy to have on this, because outside of Flashpoint, there's a lot of people who feel that the New 52 and some of the other stuff he did, nobody really thinks he should be in the position he is in right now, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, basically the takeaway is that Kevin Feige's don't grow on trees. And you probably never know who there is. I'm sure that there are several other Kevin Feige's out there, but we don't know who they are. They haven't made their mark yet. Maybe they haven't been in a position yet where they can make the change. Maybe the next Kevin Feige, the Kevin Feige who is going to save DC at some point. Right now, he's busy running, getting coffee for Tsutahara or something like that. That's the thing, that the talent is there, but we haven't seen it, and maybe they haven't either. They need to find that talent. And it's very difficult for us to go and suggest. Like, for instance, if we had gone back in time, say, 15 years, to before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we were given like this task, find someone to helm a cinematic universe based on the Marvel movies. How many would have suggested the name Kevin Feige?
Probably one, Kevin Feige.
Yeah, exactly. Like none had heard of him then. Like he was just like a random additional producer who had credits on shitty movies like Hulk and Punisher and Spider-Man 3 and the shitty Fantastic Four movies. So why would anyone go with that? People would instead have gone with like comic book writers and editors from the Marvel offices, and they would have been wrong. And that's what I'm thinking too, that they are so busy trying to find someone who might act as a Kevin Feige, and maybe that they are ignoring the real Kevin Feige's out there because they haven't made their mark yet.
So even though Jeff Johns got demoted now, and he is taking a brunt of a lot of this because reportedly, and this is not our words, this is the reported words, Jeff Johns and John Berg were intimately involved in this Joss Whedon cut, phrasing, as Rob likes to say on the After Dark podcast. This is something that we have covered quite a bit on the podcast over there, and as we predicted, and as rumors are flying now, that if we are going to get any kind of extended cut of this film on Blu-ray, it's going to be the Joss Whedon cut to begin with that was pared down to 2 hours that we got in theaters. But the buzz everywhere, of course, is about the Zack Snyder cut. Kevin Smith fueled that fire a little bit. There's this petition going around that's kind of questionable as far as some of the signatures that's going around to supposedly get this cut. And Rob and I have stressed several times over, they're not going to spend any more money to try and put together a cut, as you put it to me off show, and I gave you credit for saying in an episode of After Dark podcast, they're not going to potentially put together a movie that's going to make them look any worse than they already do right now. Right, Andre?
Yeah, that's the thing, because if they release the extended cut, or rather the Snyder Cut, and it gets better reviews and people respond to it better than the version that they paid so much money to release instead, they're gonna look really bad, and it's gonna be really embarrassing for them. But of course, that is much easier if there is a new management in place at Warner a few months down the line, then that's perfectly fine to embarrass the previous fools. So it's basically like the current regime, they should have no reason to want to release something that potentially might make them look stupid. But the next regime, they'd love to make the previous guys look stupid and make themselves look brighter by comparison. This is like a tried and true practice in Hollywood. Dump the previous guy's films and make your own shine. But still, we could end up seeing a Snyder Cut, because it does exist. What I have been told, and like this is not so much out there, this is something that I have been told, is that the Snyder Cut exists. Basically, it's not a 100% locked cut, but it is a cut that was completed enough that they have screened it for test audiences. It's about 50 minutes longer than the theatrical cut. The score by Junkie XL is complete, and the visual effects are 90% completed in it, meaning that they have to spend more money finishing it up. And that's kind of like the sticking point. The current management, why would they want to throw more good money after bad on something that's going to make them look stupid if people really take to this other cut of the movie? Whereas the next management, they'd be very happy to do that.
And that's the only possibility you have, really. Rob?
Isn't the problem that Zack Snyder's the guy who got us into this situation in the first place?
And that's what we keep pointing out, too, yeah.
I don't see how a Zack Snyder cut makes things better. This current incarnation of the Batman versus Superman, Snyderverse, Man of Steel, DCE cinematic extended genre experiment, or whatever you want to call it, yeah, it does have its fans. My only question is, why?
Well, and I think that's the primary thing here is it's like, yeah, Snyder got us to this point, but considering what we did end up with, we might as well have just let Snyder finish it off. They might as well have just let him finish this. He had his trilogy done and over with, and then we move on from here. I'm not the biggest fan of what he did to these characters. I'm not the biggest fan of what he built in this universe, but I can't take away the fact that he might not have at least deserved to at least show us what his plan was. And, you know, we should have seen Superman basically be the villain in this movie. We should have got what Andre likes to call the Mad Max Batman here, and we didn't. We got a Frankenstein film, as we all keep referring to it, instead. And it's just heartbreaking at how much money was sunk into this situation, and regardless of the reports we're getting from the Snyder version, let's face it, most of the shit we're getting is it wouldn't have been so much better, it's just darker.
Or at least more consistent.
Speaking of consistency, I loved Elfman's score, but I agree that it was completely out of place with the universe we got. Yeah.
It just was completely unsuited for it. Whereas the JXL score in Batman v Superman fit perfectly for the movie. Again, it was the wrong movie, but given that the movie was wrong, the execution of the movie was flawless in the ultimate cut. And you said that this is all on Snyder, that it's his fault that we get here. And partially that is true, because he's the one who made these movies, yes. But he didn't want to make Batman v Superman. That was mandated by Warner. He was intending to do Man of Steel Part 2. That's the movie he should have done. And then the order came from higher up. Now, Superman can't do this on his own. Character just isn't popular enough. So we're going to bring in Batman. You are going to do Batman versus Superman. Not Batman and Superman, best of friends despite differences, but Batman versus Superman. This was a Warner mandate, and within those confines, Snyder made the best movie that he could. So that's really not on him. And after that, he then had the vision for what was going to happen next for 2 more movies. Basically, he had the vision for Justice League Part 1, Part 2, in which we were going to get Steppenwolf, we were going to get the Mad Max Batman with crazy Superman that is supportive of Darkseid, and we were going to get Darkseid with a little bit of injustice and everything. That's what we were going to get. And after Batman v Superman, the response was very negative by and large, let's be honest about it. But the 2 scenes that people universally responded to were the Mad Max Batman scene, plus the warehouse Batman fight scene, which was also cool. And basically we were robbed of the Mad Max Batman, which is what everyone wanted to see. And we were also robbed of Darkseid, and what we got instead was Steppenwolf. And shitty Steppenwolf, shitty compromised Steppenwolf. Even the actor playing Steppenwolf, the guy from Rome, even he apparently is not a fan of how it turned out. which really you can't blame him for. So I think they were actually really shitty to Snyder here, because first they gave him a mandate. You are going to do this. And then when that didn't work, instead of taking the blame and saying, oh shit, we really shouldn't have done that, shouldn't we? We gave a wrong mandate here. And they want to go and change his plan midways, so that the two movies became one. And that's Mad Max Batman gone right there. And then they go in and they change it after the fact. And of course then you have like the tragic suicide of Snyder's daughter, which is beyond words and beyond belief. But apparently what I have been told is that Snyder wanted to finish the movie, that he and Deborah wanted to get away from the horror of everything else and focus on that and kind of like get that done for her. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've been told. And then Warner used the opportunity to force him out, to then have Joss Whedon do the movie that they wanted, and then they could like get the word out that the director of the Avengers is now doing Justice League, so everything is fine now.
Right.
Which obviously it wasn't. And honestly, I have to say that for myself, the movie that I want to see is not really the Snyder Cut, because that's still compromised. What I would have liked to see is the two-parter with Mad Max Batman. But the closest to that is the Snyder Cut, which has Darkseid and everything. So honestly, I'd rather have that than the Whedon cut that we currently have. And I think that that movie maybe isn't better by any objective means. I don't think it would have been received any better. I don't think it would have gotten any better reviews. Possibly it would have gotten even worse reviews. But I think, like Batman v Superman, it is probably more consistent. And if you can get into it and disregard everything else, it might make for a more rewarding movie. Well, it sounds like we are all in agreement then, that we would all like to see the Snyder Cut, even if just for curiosity. So let's hope that ends up being released.
Right.
Yeah.
As you said, though, I don't think it's going to be any better or anything like that. It's still a product of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. But like you said, out of curiosity's sake, I'd love to just sit down and see it, just to see it and compare.
For now, though, I think we've got pretty much everything covered. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me here today. So Tom, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And Rob, thanks for joining us.
And thank you as always. And of course, as Andre said, we will be keeping you up to date on all the latest DC news and all the latest movie news and pop culture news. And if you like what we do here at Midnight's Edge, then please click that subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon, so that way you will be notified of all the latest new content that is uploaded. And if you really like the show, then why not consider supporting us through Patreon? Patreon supporters will get all kinds of bonuses. You'll get early access to the Trek logs. You'll get early notifications of mini documentaries. You'll get full uncut audio of mini documentaries. You'll get all kinds of bonuses. You'll get behind the edge making of videos. We got a lot of those coming up, don't we, Andre?
Oh yes, absolutely. For those who don't know what Rob is talking about, Beyond the Edge is basically the Behind Midnight's Edge podcast, where I relay the entire story of Midnight's Edge from its inception up until today. The ups and downs of running a YouTube channel.
Yes, and as I always say, if you don't have the means to support us through Patreon, then please subscribe and please share with your friends and your family and even your enemies, because we can't do this without you. And you are the reason why we do this here. So once again, we'd like to thank Andre, and we'd like to thank Tom. I am your narrator supreme, Mr. Rob Robot Shlomo, and we will catch you next time.